The setting of the story of the Garden of Eden predates conventional history. Recent advances in scanning technology and understanding of climate changes, combined with understanding yet more translation errors, now provide us with a very plausible location. We are now confident that we've located the Garden of Eden.
So, where was the Garden of Eden?
Hello folks, welcome to the 37th edition of the Quintology files. Today's subject follows neatly on from the last episode when we were looking about the origin of heaven and where it was located. Now we're going to look at the Garden of Eden. When asked, most people either conclude the Garden of Eden is a purely mythical concept, or believers ascribe an idealized paradise from which Adam and Eve were evicted. Although not widely publicised, we are now confident that we've located the Garden of Eden. The setting of the story of the Garden of Eden predates conventional history. In biblical terms, it's linked to the very first humans, Adam and Eve. Therefore, rather surprising that Genesis, where describing the flow of rivers in and out of the Garden of Eden, is able to name the 4 rivers, and 2 remain common knowledge today, the Tigris and the Euphrates. This has led many to make assertions concerning the location of the Garden of Eden. Recent advances in scanning technology and understanding of climate changes, combined with understanding yet more translation errors, now provide us with a very plausible location and cultural explanation for what must have been a very long time an oral tradition handed down by the proto-Israelites. Given the geographical setting, I do not doubt that ancient written records exist amongst the voluminous Sumerian cuneiform tablets. However, I have not come across any reference to translated Sumerian tablets recording something similar to the biblical Garden of Eden story. That does not mean that we will not find a Sumerian tale predating the Genesis story of the Garden of Eden, as the vast majority, around 90% of the cuneiform tablets recovered from Mesopotamia, remain untranslated. Moreover, the names of the 2 rivers we instantly recognize, and the fact that Abraham must have been familiar with the story, mean it must have a Sumerian origin, and a recorded version is awaiting our discovery.
So, where was the Garden of Eden?
Let's start with the location and the translation error which led so many weird locations being suggested. Genesis 2 verses 10 to 14 provides strong location clues. Verse 10, "And a river went out of Eden to water the garden, and from thence it was parted and became into 4 heads." Verse 11, "The name of the first is Pison. That is it which encompasseth the whole of the land of Havilah, where there is gold. And the gold of that land is good. There is bdellium and onyx stone. And the name of the second river is Gihon. And the same it is that encompassed the whole land of Ethiopia. And the name of the third river is Hiddekel. that is it which goeth towards the east of Assyria. And the fourth river is Euphrates. This somewhat convoluted wording in Genesis, that Eden's river came into four heads, was explained by biblical scholar and archaeologist Ephraim Spicer, who lived 1902 to 1965, who interpreted the text as referring to the four rivers upstream of their confluence, merging into one river that watered the Garden of Eden. This is a strange perspective, but understandable if the description is of a folk memory, written millennia after the events concerned by those unfamiliar with the geography. We instantly recognized Hedekel as the Sumerian and Akkadian names for that river, today referred to by its Greek name, the Tigris. But where are the Sidon and the Gihon? Theologians and historians have speculated the garden being in almost as many places as Atlantis. Suggestions have included Mongolia, India, and Ethiopia. Some attempting links to other great rivers of the ancient world, the Nile and even the Ganges. Others have focused on Turkey because the headwaters of the Euphrates and the Tigris arise there, as well as links in Genesis to Mount Ararat. The identity of the Gihon, which encompasseth the whole land of Ethiopia, was for a long time a major problem. In Hebrew, the geographical reference was to Gush or Cush. The translators of the King James Bible rendered Cush as Ethiopia, confusing researchers for centuries. Dr. Yuris Zarins of Southwest Missouri State University believes the Gihon is the Karen River, which rises in Iran and flows southwesterly towards the present Gulf. It was Ephraim Spicer who suggested that the mysterious Gush or Cush should be correctly written as the Kashu, and that it refers to a people then known as the Kashai or the Galzu, but nowadays known as the Kassites, who came from Elam, east of Babylon. Now, if we look on the map, we can see the general consensus now is the Garden of Eden is now submerged in the headwaters of the Persian Gulf. The river I just referred to, the Karan, coming in here from Iran. The Tigris and the Euphrates are well known, and to give perspective, this shows the boundary, the political boundary of Iraq today. And we'll talk next about the Pison, which comes in from here. So the four rivers that used to come together here then watered the Garden of Eden. In 1550 BC, the Hittites under Mercilus I attacked and captured Babylon. But after plundering the city and ending the dynasty of Hammurabi, the Hittites abandoned Babylon, leaving it defenseless, which allowed the Kassites to take over and control it for 4 centuries. So the Kassites came down this way from the Karen direction, now in Iran. The remote bands of Israelites infiltrating from Edom and Moab towards the end of this period may have had knowledge of the Kassites, but as with most of Genesis, the knowledge was more likely gained from direct access to old tablets during the exile in Babylon in the 6th century BC. Today, the Karen is feeble and sickly from many dams and environmental abuse. Entering the Euphrates at Koramashar just before the current head of the Persian Gulf.
What of the fourth river, the Pison?
This can be identified from references to the land of Havilah in the Table of Nations, which is Genesis chapter 10, as relating to localities and people within a Mesopotamian Arabian framework. The biblical evidence of Havilah is supported by Landsat images from space. These images clearly show a fossil river that once flowed through northern Arabia and through the now dry riverbeds, which are known today as the Wadi Rinia and the Wadi Batin. Genesis also identifies the region through which the Pison flowed as being rich in bdellium and an aromatic gum resin that can still be found in northern Arabia, and gold, which was still mined in the general area into the 1950s. The Sasaean would have joined the Euphrates somewhere near Basra, just before the Karen. So, we now have good reason to believe that we've identified the four rivers that flowed into the Garden of Eden, but it suggests that the garden itself is now underwater. Maybe the area at the head of the Persian Gulf. This actually makes absolute sense as a description of a verdant, bountiful garden suggests a lowland area benefiting from abundant fresh water. Dr. Euphrates Zarins first published his work on locating the Garden of Eden in 1983. And Dora Jane Hamblin published a very good descriptive article of his work in 1986 entitled, "Has the Garden of Eden been located at last?" Dr. Zarins identified ancient changes in climate as the likely cause of social changes in the region, which led to the displacement of early hunter-gatherer communities from flooded areas and shifts in prevailing hunter-gatherer lifestyles to the domestication of animals and the cultivation of crops. Dr. Zarins mapped the coastline of the Persian Gulf, showing that 30,000 years ago, the head of the Gulf was near the Straits of Hormuz, almost 1,000 kilometers downstream of the current position. By 15,000 BC, climatic changes significantly reduced rainfall, and the land may have become relatively arid. Low rainfall persisted until around 6,000 BC, when far moister climate, known as the Neolithic wet phase, would have replenished the rivers and the low-lying areas again, restoring a lush paradise for hunter-gatherers. By 6000 BC, it's estimated that the Persian Gulf headwaters had risen to within 150 meters of the current coastline. So, 6000 BC, the Persian Gulf would have got to about here, roughly. New knowledge emerging over the past 50 years may have refined the climate data. We know the last ice age maxima was around 22,000 years ago, with 3 dramatic climate change phases referred to as the oldest, older, and younger driest periods. Sea levels generally rose throughout this period, but rose faster at certain times. As covered in my prequel book, sea levels rose very fast immediately after the Hiawatha meteor impact in 10,765 BC. We also know this rapid rise in sea levels following the huge loss of ice slowed again after 9,600 BC. About this time, rapid changes led to the introduction of crop cultivation and the domestication of animals in the Fertile Crescent very soon afterwards. The more recent climate data corroborates Dr. Zarin's theory, if slightly modifying the dates. Critically, it depends how the current area of the Persian Gulf that was previously dry land became flooded between 9600 BC and the 6000 BC date Dr. Zarin gives for the return of high rainfall and lush vegetation. The return of lush conditions in the Persian Gulf area would have enabled hunter-gatherer communities to flourish.
So, you suggest that the rising of the sea levels expelled Adam and Eve rather than God?
Yes, and we might find it was a meteor impact that caused the folk memory. If viewers care to view episode 7 in this series, we discussed a new technique to pinpoint meteor impact craters that lie deep beneath the ocean. The first such discovery, under 2 kilometers of the Indian Ocean, is named as the Burkle crater. This occurred around 2900 BC and would have created a tsunami that would have reached right the way up the Persian Gulf. Indeed, much of the shoreline of the Persian Gulf is almost mountainous, so as it narrows, the force of any tsunami would be funneled rather than dissipated, ending with a ferocious impact on the area where the Garden of Eden may have been located. Such a memorable event must surely have survived in folk memory. Personally, I would have thought the origin of the Garden of Eden story would have been at least a few thousand years earlier, closer to the 6000 BC date than the 3000 BC date. But the tsunami delivered destruction is highly plausible and would have been reflected in collective memory. As far as I am aware, we have not yet found this story amongst the few million cuneiform tablets excavated from the ruins of Sumerian cities. But we have found Sumerian records which tell of a luxuriant and lovely land they called Dilmun. On the adjacent higher land around the Gulf, the Havilah Sinai area of northern Arabia to the west and the Tigris Euphrates valley to the north, agriculture may have developed using the crops domesticated a few thousand years earlier in the Zagros foothills. These new farmers are also known as the Ubaid people, as Proto-Sumerian culture dating from around 5300 BC to 4000 BC. We also know from Sumerian records that the demise of Sumeria was partly caused by the steady inundation of its most fertile farmlands by encroaching salt water, as sea levels rose at the end of the 2nd millennium BC. This implies crop cultivation had spread into the very fertile Gulf lowlands, maybe into the margins of the Garden of Eden. Thus, pressure on the hunter-gatherer's domain came from both directions, cultivating farmers encroaching from the north and the west, and the rising sea levels from the southeast. During the period from, say, 6000 BC up to 3000 BC, slowly but continuously, the rising level of the Persian Gulf submerged the low-lying Garden of Eden. This forced the hunter-gatherer community to move on, pitting their survivors against the settled farming communities. We have found evidence of Ubaid communities along the western coast of the Gulf, down past Kuwait, this area, exactly the area that the retreating hunter-gatherers fleeing from the Garden of Eden would naturally migrate to. Faced with more technically advanced communities, those fleeing from the Garden of Eden realized that the days of leisure were over, and henceforth food only came from working the land, from the sweat of their brows. This was the punishment for their sins, as recorded in the book of Genesis. In fact, it's very interesting to compare the creation story of Judaism with other creation stories. Most such belief systems either credit God or small teams of visiting wise men, such as the 7 Apkallu, with teaching humans how to cultivate crops, how to make bread, how to brew beer, identify medicinal properties, weave textiles, construct buildings, etc. On the other hand, Genesis describes a hunter-gatherer society and includes a weak excuse, eating fruit, to shove them into farming. A set of clothes is made for them, but there's no record of any teaching of anything else. Given the overwhelming evidence that Genesis was crafted from far older creation stories, this is a strange omission. Its writers could not imagine a time when humans did not know how to farm, to cook, identify natural medicines, etc., and saw no role for God in how these skills were gained. If you found this interesting, you may like to read more about how we've identified the Garden of Eden in this book. It's the one linked here. Thank you very much for your attention. I hope you enjoyed this. We'll see you for the next episode. Goodbye.